Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to SME Resilience webinar titled INL's Resilience Tools and Services. I'm Tamel Harbison with the national team at SAME, and I would just like to go over a couple housekeeping rules for today's session. You have entered into the webinar in a listen-only mode, but we ask that you double-check your mics and see if they are muted. And we ask that if you have any questions throughout today's presentation, that you write them via the questions tab in your control panel. You may download today's presentation in the handout section and today's PDA certificate. And this webinar will be recorded for a later viewing. And now I would like to turn it over for our moderator today, Albert Romano.
Thank you, Tamel, and good afternoon and morning to everyone. Glad you joined us this morning / afternoon. We have a great presentation ahead. Very excited about the topic. We have a great speaker as well. And so with that, I'd like to just kind of quickly mention that, again, my name is Albert Romano. I serve on the Resilience Committee, Resilience Community of Interest for SAME as a vice chair. And on behalf of Joe Manus, the chair, would like to welcome all of you to this session. It's one of many that we have been holding webinars for resilience across the country, and hope that we'll have more of these going forward. So please stay tuned. And if any of you are interested in participating in the RCOI, certainly reach out to one of us as committee members, and we'll be able to engage you as appropriate and as possible. I'm going to take a few seconds here to introduce our speaker, Kelly Wilson, who is representing the Idaho National Lab. She's the department manager of the infrastructure analysis within the lab in the Homeland Security Division of IDL. She has previously worked at the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, those of you that know of CISA, at DHS as a protective security advisor. She was assigned to the Southern California and National Capital Region in that capacity. She served as a security and resiliency subject matter expert there, and was the link between the state and local and tribal territorial aspects of the organization and DHS's infrastructure mission partners. Prior to that, Kelly was with the District of Columbia. She was a Homeland Security and Emergency Management Agency branch chief, where she oversaw the district's critical infrastructure protection program. She has an impressive career. I got a few more things to share with you. She was also chair of the Metropolitan Washington COG for Infrastructure Protection Regional Programmatic Working Group, where she provided subject matter expertise as well in that capacity and guidance to the district's Fusion Center move to the agency. Prior to that, she was also in the military, serving in the U.S. Army, where she oversaw some tour, and she was supporting the Operation Iraqi Freedom in her capacity with the military. She was also serving as a Maryland State Trooper and served in 2 state and local fusion centers, the one in Washington Regional area, the Threat Analysis Center, and also the East Bay Terrorism Early Warning Group. She's also been awarded and recognized for her efforts in 2006, where she was a nominee for the International Association of Chiefs of Police, the Parade Magazine Police Officer of the Year Award. And she was also named Trooper of the Year in 2001 for the Maryland State Police Forestville Barracks. Last but not least, she was awarded the FBI InfraGard National Protective Security Advisor of the Year 2015. So great credentials, and it's very great to see such a talented person here presenting to us today. She has lastly a degree in business management from University of Phoenix, the John Sperling School of Business. So I think I'll stop here, and Kelly, if you could please go ahead and take over and give us a presentation. Thank you.
Okay, great. I will say that my travels to become a critical infrastructure expert were purely accidental. They sort of came to me through little bits and pieces of my career, but I really love what I do, and I love that kind of on a national level I can help solve tough critical infrastructure problems. I'm supposed to tell you some fun facts, I guess, on this slide. I actually just came back from a camping trip and went through Montana, Wyoming, hit a little bit of Yellowstone National Park and Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, and then came down to the Snake River. It was just lovely, and no snow yet, so that was good. My first job out of high school was as a machinist, not because that's what I wanted to do, but because when I opened the newspaper to find jobs, it was the one that paid the most. So I wound up doing that for a few years. And in my free time, when I have free time, I do a one-panel cartoon column called Notes from the Sanitarium. And that sort of forces me to stop working and making dinner and just focus on something purely fun. So, all right, let me see if I can do my next slide. There we go. So I wanted to share a little bit about INL. I worked with INL for several years when I was with CISA, and I thought I knew what INL did and what the capabilities are, but in reality, INL does much more than I thought, and every day I'm finding new organizations within INL that are doing something very interesting, very cool, and you'd be hard pressed not to find something that's being done at INL that doesn't impact or create a better understanding of infrastructure security and resiliency. So I'm going to go a little bit over what INL does. There's an IROC, INL Resilience Optimization Center within INL. I'll tell you a little bit about that. And then my department is within the Infrastructure Assurance and Analysis Division. And tell you a little bit about some of our capabilities. There's 3 departments, and you may be interested in some of the free DHS-sponsored services that we do there. And then I'll tell you a little bit about what my department does and what our capabilities are and how you might engage with us in the future. And then I'll leave some time for any questions before we wrap up for the day. So this is a depiction of all the things that are going on in INL. Again, a few years ago, if you would have asked me what INL does, I would say they do nuclear reactor research and resiliency studies with DHS. But as you can see in the green triangle, that there's a lot of energy research, how to use and recycle corn stalks for biofuel. A lot of battery technology is being moved forward. In fact, one of the batteries on the Mars rover was invented at INL. INL, I think there's a slide, but we have, our offices where a lot of the lab and science work and analysis is done, but then we have over 900 square miles of rangeland where some of these nuclear technologies, weapon technologies, and other things are being tested out in the field. On the left, the orange triangle, I've starred a couple of things that may interest you, and one is the critical infrastructure protection, and it's also very much a resiliency mission as well. We have a couple of groups that do industrial control systems, cybersecurity, penetration testing, simulation, and then we have electric grid resiliency. We have a couple of test ranges where you can simulate, and actually we have an isolated electric grid out on our range where you can blast it with EMP and see what'll happen. So a lot of cool stuff out there. Okay, so here's a slide that depicts all of our rangeland. So we are spread out over hundreds of miles. We have electric and water security test beds. So these are smaller, fully functional systems that you can test and isolate and manipulate. We have RAD ranges. We actually do, we make the armament for I think it's the Abrams tanks out there. We do some explosive testing, nuclear testing, and then down in our Idaho Falls campus is where we do a lot of our research development, analysis, writing, things like that. And then we also have a wireless test bed. So not only sort of older wireless technology, but a lot of looking and testing as well, and 5G technology as well. Whoops, wrong button. IROC. So out of all the programs that go on in INL, you know, how do you gather together all the infrastructure resiliency related programs, right? It's kind of like most large government agencies, it was kind of siloed, right? And so you may not be able to get and collaborate with other groups that are doing similar compatible work with you. So about a year and a half ago, the INL Resilience Optimization Center was created, and it's basically a virtual way of ensuring that our infrastructure resiliency capabilities are not siloed, and that if the next customer wants to engage with us, that they email and contact one place with their question or their idea, and then IROC does the work of finding all of the groups within INL that may be able to help that customer. So within IROC, it's a way of, again, rapidly assessing what your needs are and who you should work with. And I've only been at INL for the past 18 months, and I'm still learning myself, you know, who my counterparts are within the lab. And so it's a way to get you working with us as quickly as possible. Next slide. So we do a lot of modeling and simulation, visualization of data, in fact, inventing new ways of visualizing movement of commodities and other types of analysis and research. We have ICS, under the ICS research and testing analysis, this is a pretty cool thing. It's, you see the metal box, we call it a skid. And we have, I want to say 5 or 6 skids, and they are basically miniaturized control systems. So we have a miniaturized chemical plant, miniaturized water treatment system, miniaturized transformer substation, and basically companies can come in and install whatever systems they're using and attack it or test a new attack. Or it's also for education to be able to solidify the cyber physical connection. So how a cyber attack might water hammer a water treatment plant, or how it may cause chemicals to boil over in a process. And so we not only use that for customer research, but we also do a lot of the ICS 301, 401 classes that DHS sponsors. And this allows students to basically run this miniature system and prevent, detect, and attack, and stop the process before it overflows. And then again, we have a electric test range. Before I left DHS, we started a study on targeted EMP attack on the electric grid. And I was pleased to see that a few years ago, INL actually did an EMP test. And I want to say they had attacked a single node within our large system, and the EMP traveled like 13 miles down the line and destroyed a bunch of other stuff. I think the report's available for review, but it kind of takes a concept out of theory and more into practical application. This is our water security test bed. So it simulates a small water system, and then those white buildings on the range you see there simulate a household and all the water components that may be in it. I believe one of the first reasons why the test bed was built was through the EPA to test poisoning of a water system and decontamination. So mapping the flow of the poison and being able to clean it up. But since then, we can now look at physical and cyber scenarios, and we're looking at connecting it to some of the wireless technology and exploring more that way. Although we are a little bit inhibited. You may have heard that it snows in Idaho, so during certain times of the year, the water test bed is more in the planning phase and acquisition of components, and then during the spring and summer, you can actually go out and do the testing. Next is our wireless institute. So again, we have physical wireless systems. We're developing and validating 5G security protocols and testing and improving cellular and radio and satellite, and even going back to some of the older technology, looking at that. Next is, well, the power test bed. So again, you can physically attack the system, or you can use the, in the smaller box in the bottom, you can essentially simulate a known test bed. So from your perspective, if you're working with a military installation that uses, you know, their own power technology, or one that's known outside the fence line, you can simulate that system and attack it and derive what the consequences are without actually, you know, touching the physical system. So now I'm moving on to our division. So I talked about big INL and what big INL does. Within our division, National and Homeland Security Directorate, we are the Infrastructure Assurance and Analysis Division, and there's three different departments. Mine is Infrastructure Analysis. We have a Cyber Resiliency office, and then we have a Workforce and Development and Training office. The Workforce Development and Training office, I actually didn't understand what it was until I came on board. It's developing the infrastructure workforce and the cyber-aware infrastructure workforce outside of INL. So we have customers that are military, federal DHS, and others that commission us to go out and teach our cyber infrastructure related courses. We have from very basic, you know, you can barely, you know, upload your software onto your computer, but you kind of know the basics of cyber hygiene, all the way up to maybe a manager who doesn't have a lot, you know, you don't need to know the ins and outs of cyber, but you need to be able to manage that and create policies and acquisition software and things like that to protect cybersecurity. And then all the way up to someone who may be running the ICS or IT department in an organization and needs to know the ins and outs and the scanning and all the technology. Many of those classes I think are free. We do have a classroom in Idaho Falls where we have physical classes, and we actually just held our first COVID distancing class and proved that it worked out just fine. But I believe there's also some online with live instructors that are being done as well. The Cyber Resiliency group, that other department, they do a lot of the threat and hunting activities for Department of Homeland Security, but also they do advice. They provide advice to customers who may have been attacked or need advice and assessments of their system. So threat hunting, Malcolm, Cyber Sentry. Let me see. And then within my program, I don't know if I have a slide on this, but we just created a commercial routing application after COVID-19. You know, it's very important for truckers to be able to keep the supply chain going. But what they were finding was each state, and even in some cases different counties, were modifying their rules as far as trucks and what stations were open, and some were extending, you know, the trucker medical testing, and what if my CDL license expires during COVID and I can't get it renewed. So it's a way for a truck driver to be able to put in his or her route and to be able to see maybe some of them complications in each state and be able to modify their trajectory based on their status as a truck driver, or maybe what is an easier route through the nation. And then I'll go into some of these other things like our regional resiliency assessments and our vulnerability assessments and our dependency analysis. So this is what my department does. It's infrastructure analysis, and we do a lot of our resiliency assessments for systems that are large, that are already intact. But I will tell you, from my experience with Department of Homeland Security, it's a lot easier to bake in or build in resiliency and security in the blueprint phase. It's a lot more cost effective as well. I was telling Albert, I did a study on Ashburn data centers on the resiliency up there, and you know, how do you protect the wires and the components from EMP? How do you protect it from space weather? And it's, I want to say, like 25 times cheaper to protect that infrastructure if you build it in when you're constructing the facility as opposed to afterwards. And one kind of funny anecdote is when I was in Washington, D.C., I had a major government building contact me, and they said, you know, we're really worried about our security. What we do here is very important. We think we're threatened by attacks, and someone could park a truck bomb and blow us up. And I don't know why they put that government facility where they did, because it was at a confluence of like 5 different highways. But they literally wanted me to write a letter so they can move a highway on-ramp to protect their building. So it's a lot easier to look at the function of the building and build in that resiliency and security ahead of time, and talk to us or DHS experts to be able to get that. And also, sometimes you can take a solution that would help with security, but it also, you can use maybe landscaping dollars instead of security dollars to pay for something that would have dual use. In any event, we have a lot of modeling and simulation folks, and these are just small snapshots. I don't know if you can see my my pointer, but this is what we kind of colloquially will call a speedometer thermometer. So this is a simulation of a storm surge in a city area in a port, and as it relates to substations. And you can see whether a particular substation would be destroyed, and down the line, what would be the effects of the other substations. So you can see what's at higher risk and maybe put in place some mitigation. We also have on the bottom left here, it's a subway map, and it shows directionality, but it also shows flow, the quantity of flow to a particular direction. And here in the middle, with a water treatment facility, this is a snapshot of our AHA tool, All Hazards Analysis tool, where we're looking at, in the middle here, a water treatment facility, and what are the upstream and downstream dependencies and consequences. A lot of these analysis are very important in understanding the consequences of a hurricane, disaster, like an earthquake, and being able to employ mitigation strategies. We actually did a test of this AHA tool, understanding the upstream and downstream consequences of a node being taken offline with the state of California and FEMA Region 9. You may have heard that they have public safety power shutoffs, and when that first started, the customers, whether they be major water treatment plants or even a residential customer, did not know what circuits were being shut off and what the consequences were. So it was just sort of, if a circuit was in a zone where it needed to be shut off, it didn't matter what was going down. So in turn, a lot of important infrastructure was being turned off, and consequences were being felt sometimes in other states. So that's sort of the benefit of that AHA technology. So what we endeavor to do each day is to inform decisions, hopefully inform decisions before the emergency happens. Many of our projects are long-term, looking out over time. Some of our regional resiliency analysis are 3-year projects. But what we're finding is when we're doing these analysis, for example, I have an analyst doing a regional resiliency project on the Calcasieu Channel, which is, I think, an energy port in Louisiana. During the span of time during this analysis, it's been hit by 2 hurricanes, Category 4 Laura, and then I think Category 3 Delta this past couple of weeks. So even though the analysis isn't finished, the relationships that were built, the data that was already collected, and some of the initial findings were used by DHS to help with that storm system. INL does a lot of work with our kind of sister lab, Argonne National Lab. So DHS will give each lab 5 or 6 regional resiliency assessments each year to conduct. And actually this year was one of the first years that we're conducting a study together. That is on Seattle critical manufacturing. So we're both collaborating on those analysis. We also just collaborated on a booklet on basically teaching analysis and different methodologies so that a state, urban area, city, or even private sector company can do their own regional resiliency assessments. And then, let's see, we are currently deploying our all hazards analysis tool to the state of Idaho, Utah, Boise State University. Some of the students there, the critical infrastructure students, are using that to analyze and solve some of our local infrastructure problems. I mentioned this as a Region 9 pilot. We're also working with the U.S. Air Force Office of Energy Assurance and the Army Cyber Institute using our AHA analysis tool. We also, I guess I forgot to tell you, INL has 5 supercomputers. I want to say our best one is, I think, number 35 in the U.S. But one benefit of us having our supercomputers is that it's nearly free for us to use. So if you needed to run something very complicated, you don't have to rent out the supercomputer and pay that huge price. It's free to us to use, and it's just the time it takes to set up the analysis. And literally, a problem that you may take months to solve in a regular computer, we could do in like 5 seconds. So it's pretty cool to have those on site. And then I have an analyst. His name is Dr. Barry Azell, and he created a 1- and 3-day risk and decision analysis course. And it was originally developed for the classroom, but because of COVID, we just had it certified with continuing education units to be held virtually. And we held our first virtual class, I think in September, and we got really great feedback. And I think we're going to have one more that we can do pro bono, but I think the cost of hosting the course is very cheap to host, especially in the virtual format. So, you know, I'm going through a lot of these very quickly. Probably 30 minutes isn't enough. If you want a deeper dive, something a little bit more comprehensive about any of these tools or services, please feel free to contact me, and I can get you some flyers on it. I know I'm going very fast. Okay, here's that slide that I forgot about. This is our commercial routing application, a view of the web page. So we made it so that you can, and this is publicly accessible, you can look it up online. This is the view of the page as it would look on your iPhone or tablet. But the green and yellow and red represent issues that a trucker may run into. And you could see the black outlined states are the routes, the proposed route that the truck driver may take. And it goes into airport closures and inspections and credentialing and safety checks and things like that. So we are looking beyond COVID-19, knowing that in the case of a hurricane, that truckers may be trying to provide mutual aid assistance and may need to go from, Tennessee down to Florida. And if there are major road closures, we're looking at using that for disasters beyond COVID. And even internally in INL, we're developing a tweak to this system. We have a unit that goes out nationally and recovers radiological material and baking in risk scores to each location so that they can prioritize where they go. Risk scores that not only go into COVID, but social unrest. Is the recovery near a major city center or an event? So that is currently in the development process. The RRAP's regional resiliency assessments are kind of our cornerstone program. We've been doing these for about 10 years. It's a DHS service. So what happens is DHS asks their state and local reps to come up with ideas to assess the resiliency of a large system. And just to back up a little bit, after 9/11, DHS was very security oriented as it related to a critical infrastructure facility, right? What if a terrorist wanted to attack our water treatment plant or our critical substation? But how do you assess the resiliency of an regionally interconnected, very complex system? And so this was how RRAPs were born. RRAPs not only look at complicated systems, but they also have a way of getting people in the same room and talking about a shared problem and solutions where they may have not worked together before. RRAPs are a 3-year process. So the first year is the nomination and scoping, data collection, actually getting down on the ground and meeting the people and looking at the infrastructure. Towards the end of the first year, usually a report is written. And when these first started out, it was kind of like we'd hand over a phone book. Here's your problem and here's what to do about it. And now it's more of a streamlined report, kind of magazine-like. It usually comes along with something else. So one of the problems may be, hey, I do not know where all my oil and natural gas pipelines are. And not only do I not know where they are, I don't know their criticality. I don't know what service they provide or their consequence of loss. So it may be in addition to a report that we hand over like a GIS database on where all the assets are, and then maybe a modeling and simulation on the commodity flow and where it winds up. One thing that sets the RRAP program apart is that it's not just a mic drop. Here's your problem, and I hope you guys have fun solving the problem and funding a solution in the years ahead. The RRAP takes the very last year of the assessment program and the remaining money to help implement an option for consideration or an activity that would enhance the resiliency of that system. So typically these reports list several options for consideration that may range from low cost, no cost, up to something that may need some major funding, and the state or the infrastructure owner operator will say, we would sure like to work with you to do these 2 or 3 things before the end of the study. And it could be modeling simulation, it could be facilitating a discussion or improving plans, it could be photographing, or it could be actually another study. And I was just telling Albert this morning that one of my RRAPs on the Ashburn Data Center, I think we started that in 2014. It actually resulted in a study, an RRAP study that's starting this year on National Capital Region fuel supply chain. So these RRAPs, again, are a DHS service. that if you were an infrastructure owner, operator, state or local, you would go to DHS and say, I'd like to study, and DHS actually funds it fully. So there's no matching or anything like that. That said, if you don't want to go through DHS, INL can do a similar service for you, just direct one-to-one. It wouldn't be called RRAP though. This is a depiction of some of the projects that have been done. You could see that, well, aside from Montana, just about we've done RRAPs in multiple states. I actually have the pleasure of doing an RRAP this year in Hawaii on the maritime transportation system and resiliency of some of the alternate commercial ports. But our subjects are very wide and widely variant. So we will typically assess anything within the 16 sectors except for nuclear. There have been studies on the dairy supply chain in California. You can see we do a lot of oil and natural gas and port-related supply chains, but we also do critical manufacturing. We do electric modeling and even healthcare supply chain. And in fact, there was a healthcare supply chain RRAP going on in New York last year, and a lot of the findings, even though the study's not completely done, a lot of the findings were used in real time during COVID to contact certain medical gas manufacturers and to connect with the important stakeholders in the region that were maybe not known before the study. Next slide. AHA, again, it's a simulation tool that helps to understand the consequences of upstream and downstream infrastructure dependencies and what would happen if a node went down. And we're actually creating a time. So instead of just saying if X goes down, then these other things go down as well, we're creating a time component, understanding that many critical infrastructure may have backup. They may have a certain amount of fuel in reserve to keep a pump or a process running. So it may not be that if X goes out, this immediately goes out downstream. It may be a matter of hours, days, or weeks. So that again helps to make decisions. And I'm going a little bit faster because I think I'm running out of time. There's also a essential function analysis capability component to AHA, right? If you, I imagine a lot of you work with military installations, and there may be hundreds of buildings on that installation. How do you prioritize the criticality of those buildings? How do you give a weight and an assessment of a building as it relates to completing your mission? And once you know that, then you know kind of what you need to put the moat in the gates and maybe some resiliency enhancements behind. How do you know what to protect if you have so much to protect? And so without going too much into it, and I can get you actually an AHA deep dive presentation if you'd like to go into these components, but it really, I think, is a nice add-on to the AHA tool. I did want to share something with you. It seems not a whole lot of people know about this, but the DoD Office of Economic Adjustment just came out with a grant this past year. It recognizes that military installations oftentimes rely quite heavily and sometimes entirely on civilian infrastructure that's outside of their walls. And so before this year, DoD was not able to fund improvements or understandings of the criticality of those components and ways to improve them, and now they are. And so we're working with several states to nominate assessments for improvements on improvements to electric and water infrastructure outside of military installations. So phase one of the grant is a study to understand the problem and justify the investment. And then we believe that there'll be a phase two where worthy projects will then be funded. So shovels in the ground and improvements in infrastructure. So I I think that's very progressive for the military to be not only recognize that reliance, but also helped fund those improvements. We do know that the OEA grant has a 10% matching requirement from the state, but it's in-kind matching. So I know one state that isn't very well funded is supplying, manpower and other resources in kind to provide that match. And there's a link to that as well. One service that we provide to help understand the dependencies and interdependencies of civilian infrastructure and military installations is the RIGGER service, Regional Identification of Gaps for Operational Resilience. I believe one of the last riggers we did was up in Alaska, and I actually haven't sat in on it, but it's a way of facilitating discussion between the military installation and the civilian government and infrastructure owners and operators to be able to understand from an all-hazard standpoint ways to improve the system and make it more resilient. And before I lose my voice, that is the last slide, going through again very quickly on INL tools and services. And I've put my information here. If you'd like to contact me directly, you can contact me at my INL email, or I put the IROC email address for asking sort of broader questions beyond my department and division on how you may work with INL.
Thank you, Kelly, very much. Excellent presentation. It's really amazing what INL is doing. And as you said when you started out, that it's hard to figure out unless you actually on the inside of all the breadth and depth of capabilities that exist within the lab. I'm looking to see if there's some questions, and I just want to remind everybody, if you do have any questions, this is the time to submit them through the questions part of your app. So if you go to the tab there should be a questions area. So please go ahead and submit those in there, and I can pass them on to Kelly. In the meantime, Kelly, one of the things that you and I talked about in preparing for this presentation is because there's so much going on out there, and there's so many activities in infrastructure and assessing the different components of infrastructure and looking at resilience. One of the challenges we always run into is that what is that measure of success, and how does that go forward? And I know one of the slides you mentioned that there are some parameters that you got that the lab has looked at with the AHA program for metrics that you might have for resilience. Can you share a little bit more about what those look like and some things that you look for to look at kind of cost effectiveness or benefits of certain actions that you might look at in this modeling aspect of it? Okay.
So as far as cost effectiveness goes, and I kind of stated it when we were talking about the DoD OEA grant, is that usually the first step is studying and articulating your problem and justifying why you need resources. And so by working with INL, you are getting third-party experts to be able to look at your problem and validate what you're saying. And it's pretty interesting. Over the years, I've worked with a lot of infrastructure owners and operators, and I've given them, my advice on resiliency, and they'll call me up and they'll say, I've literally been saying exactly what you said for 5 years, but they won't listen to me. And so magically, when an outside person, expert says the same thing, then, they get funded or, they get paid attention to. So I found that in real life. I typically, with DHS, we do not do a lot of looking at cost, right? We don't price out the cost of this solution versus the other. DHS a lot of times wants us to stay away from that. In fact, when I started my port resiliency study, even the state was like, can you let us know if we should restructure our tariffs and our costs for vessels that moor overnight, you know, so that we can use that for infrastructure protection. And that's kind of a no-go for us. We can look at all different options, but we typically stay away from that. One measure of success for me is it's kind of no office is ever staffed as much as it needs to be or that you think it is. For example, we work with 2 states close to us where literally there is one, or in one instance, 2 people in the whole state that are looking at infrastructure, resiliency, and consequences. And so it's very difficult for these people to not only deal with the day-to-day storms or budget meetings or whatnot, let alone do a deep dive into a giant interconnected infrastructure system. And so I know that we are helping those states and urban areas understanding of the problem, because I simply know that they do not have the time or resources or expertise to accomplish that. Additionally, how are we making a difference? When we do these studies, we'll look at what's been done before. Going back to my Hawaii port resiliency study, I got feedback from the Homeland Security advisor that one of the components of the study that we're doing has never been done before. And she literally said the ball is being moved forward further than any other attempt by the state. And states are busy, especially ones that are plagued by disasters like California. How in the world can they look over the horizon when, you know, their current everything's burning around them? So in that respect, I do know that we're making a difference. And especially with the DHS RRAP program, you know, there's about $600,000 of DHS funding that, again, the state does not have to pay for. So that is a great benefit. And many of the federal Homeland Security dollars that are coming into the UASIs barely cover their current initiatives, let alone something additional. I do know you had a question before on funding. Did you want me to address that?
Yeah, and before we leave the RRAP, one of our audience members mentioned that they had the opportunity to be part of the DHS National Guard team that performed the site assistance and RRAP visits. They did that for 6 years. They wanted to say, and their comment is, it's an awesome program. So there's definitely someone that's been down in the field and has a lot to say positive about it. So
I wonder if I've worked with that person.
It's very possible. Very possible. Yeah. They may want to reach out to you offline. Yeah, with respect to funding, I think it's sort of a question that probably everybody has in their mind, given some of the federal challenges that will continue to evolve with responding to COVID and other things going on with the economy. What does that mean to some of the programs that you have, and if you had to put a crystal ball on, how is that affecting you? But also on the flip side of it, in terms of being able to fund these programs and working with partners, can you chat a little bit about how that works, please? Thank you.
So INL is a direct funded lab. So essentially, almost every person in INL, with the exception of some administrators, are funded by direct funded work. So meaning, I talked about our relationship with DHS and the Air Force and the U.S. Army and many other different customers. So they may retain us to work on some abstract notions of projects in the next year, and once the next year arrives, those will be solidified, or it'll be a project by project basis individually. And we are funded through IAA's interagency agreements, so it's a lot easier for one federal government agency to work with another through these IAAs and agreements. And then I believe we do have a small number of projects, at least in my division, that are also funded by private sector or local governments, like I want to say South Carolina, law enforcement, and things like that. One thing, another stream of funding is internal to INL. So INL, at its heart, we are scientists, right? We are solving difficult problems that no one else is looking at or should look at or has the resources to look at. But how do you improve the science? And actually, many of the people that work with me have gained patents while they're on the job by solving new problems and creating new technical solutions. INL funds that through a process called Lab Directed Research and Development, LDRD. And it's basically a way for scientists internally to say, you know, I'm working to solve a customer's problem, but I think we can advance our capabilities by creating this new science or testing it out. So we have several people in my department that are actually advancing existing tools and creating new ones. In fact, there's one scientist in my department that is essentially taking live satellite technology that, you know, circles the globe and training AI to be able to detect or identify infrastructure facilities, right? So, for example, we could use this for, you know, the next war or for assistance with civil problems, right? If you take a satellite and maybe something's not mapped, the AI will be able to say, this is a water treatment plant, or this is a factory, or this is a hospital, if we already don't know it, or if something's been destroyed by a bomb or a flood, or it's like 99% flooded with water. We are testing this algorithm to be able to identify what a facility is. And again, that's not something that a customer's funding, but it's internally funded, and then we can then provide that service to a customer. And we do some pro bono work through this internal lab funding. So one of the states we're working with, again, is not well funded, not well manned, and so we do some pro bono infrastructure service work for them, just being a good neighbor.
Thank you. It sounds like you have a lot of different sources that help fund and also facilitate some of the projects to move forward. One of the questions that kind of follows is a lot of the members of SAME are either architects, engineers, or come from the construction world, the AEC community, and also in the scientific community. So one of the questions that might be out there is how do you use that kind of audience in terms of those technical capabilities that exist in private sector? How do you interact with those entities in order to accomplish some of the work that you do? Your clients tend to be public sector agencies and so forth for the most part. You did mention some are private. Do you engage the private sector also in some of your scientific work, and how does that go about, particularly in an organization like ours where we have a membership that'd be interested in some of the programs that you have?
We engage them in several different ways. So for our RRAP, no RRAP would be successful if we didn't talk to the infrastructure owners and operators, and the majority of which are private sector. So it is by building trust and relationships through the process that we do sit down with infrastructure operators and owners and sometimes we ask for data, sometimes we facilitate discussions and get people together. Actually, when I first did my Ashburn, Virginia RRAP, I thought I'd get the cooperation of like 1 or 2 data centers because it's a very, very closed community, very competitive. And by the end of the study, I had 75 distinct entities from private sector to government sitting down at the same table talking. Some infrastructure owners and operators do not want to give us our data, right? Hey, PG&E, can you give us all your circuit information? You know, and if they're embroiled in, you know, lawsuits or whatever, it's just not going to happen. So actually, we have ways to go out and find open source infrastructure, and we'll churn it and analyze it, and then we'll present it back to the owner operator and ask just for their clarification, is this right? And a lot of the times they're very, very surprised about what we found in the open source about their system, and they're much more much less hesitant to talk to us when we said, this is what we have. And then I know there was a third way. Sometimes we get projects that require expertise beyond, say, what I have in my department. For example, I have a project on COVID-19 in the public health sector. So we'll go out and we have this hiring construct called casual part-time. So we can hire someone on just casually 10 hours a month, all the way up to 39 hours, depending on their availability. So we get a lot of people who already have jobs, 1 or 2 jobs already, that basically we have them on retainer to work with us as needed. And so some of these projects we require someone from the outside that can work with us. So right now I'm in the midst of recruiting on a casual part-time public health person, so they can work internally with our cyber experts to look at that cyber physical interdependency.
Excellent, thank you. Just seeing if there's any other questions that came up. Not seeing them yet, so it might be just my screen is not refreshing, but I do have one other question, if I could. Maybe we'll close with that one, because I think we're pretty short on time at this point. We're about right on time, I should say. So we have about another minute or two. Kelly, if you could touch on this question. There are other sister agencies, if you will, in the federal space that do some similar type of activities. I'm thinking of NIST and some other organizations like the other labs, perhaps. Can you describe how those interagency elements work together to address some of those common concerns that some of those different agencies across the federal spectrum are looking at? And of course, the military side is another component as well, but more on the civilian side. Can you just comment on that a little bit, and we'll close with that, please?
Well, I'm pretty new, but I do know that within the National Lab System, we have numerous projects where we're working with Sandia and with Livermore and other places on collaborations. And so in some cases, labs know very well what we're doing, and if they have a large project where they know that they don't have 100% of the capability, they'll reach out and we'll collaborate. Beyond that, I don't know. I think there's a lot of education, even within the broader federal government, about what we do. And so it's really getting the word out.
Well, it's very impressive, and I do appreciate you taking the time to talk to us about all this. And you've covered some amazing topics, and as a resilience committee or community of interest, there are some things that we probably want to follow up with you on offline and see if we can promulgate some of these discussions further, and see if we can be a resource as an agency, as an organization as well, to support some of your efforts. We have a lot of folks that cover both the military and civilian side of the equation as well. So with that, Kelly, thank you so much. Really appreciate it, and great presentation. Tamel, I think I'll turn it over to you at this point in time to close us out.
Thank you. Thank you, Albert, for moderating today's session, and Kelly for a very informative presentation. I hope everyone took some value out of today's session. I just wanted to discuss the upcoming event that we have, and that is the Virtual Small Business Conference in 3 weeks, November 4th through the 6th. We ask that you check out our website at www.smesbc.org and get signed up, get registered, check out the sessions that we have available for that week, and all the good activities, especially the networking appointment matching, just to get the opportunities that the government might have for businesses. But thank you again, Albert and Kelly, for today, and make sure you download today's presentation in the handout section and that PDH certificate. So enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.